Hey everybody, welcome back to the next episode in Helix in the Studio. This is a series I started a while back. I haven't done an episode in a little bit. I was actually waiting for this gorgeous Godin Fairmount guitar to come in to use it to showcase, because this episode is all about using the Helix to record acoustic guitars in the studio. Now, any of you who've watched the previous episodes in this series know that this is all about using the Line 6 Helix as a recording interface. You know, I see so many folks talk about using Helix as their main amp modeler, you know, on stage, live, but it makes such an amazing audio interface. And I see a lot of folks always talking about how they're, you know, feeding the outputs of the Helix into a different, you know, external USB audio interface, for instance. And I always think to myself, that's fine, I've done that as well too. There's no right and wrong here, but the Helix can be such an amazing, amazing interface. So today I want to talk about how we can use it to record the humble acoustic guitar and get some great results out of that. And I hope this helps some folks. So just as a preface to all of that, you know, a lot of folks who haven't recorded acoustic guitar wonder what the best approach is. You know, again, as always, I'm not here to tell you that the way I do things is the only way. I'm just throwing out the ideas through the experience I've had in using all sorts of different methods and what my personal preference is. And I'm going to give you some audio examples today that you can judge for yourself. And I'll also give you some tips and tricks on how we can kind of take the tones we have and shape them. But first of all, we have to understand how can we get the sound of the acoustic guitar into the computer, into the DAW, or on, you know, tape. Not that I don't think any of us are using tape too much nowadays, but, and that's a great question because, you know, I was always a fan growing up years ago, starting to record very young, of recording acoustic guitar with a studio microphone in front of it. There really, when I was young, there wasn't a lot of choices. I mean, that was it, you know. You could take a pickup on the guitar, which gave kind of less than stellar results for studio recordings. Great for live, but not so great for studio. And I'll give you some examples of that later as well. So, you know, there it was. We had to get some sort of decent acoustic guitar mic. One of the first nice ones I had that I could afford, I saved up my money for, was the Audio-Technica 4033. And that worked really nicely, you know, and it sounded great. After that, I've owned many, many mics, condensers, tubes, dynamics, ribbons, and used a whole bunch and have recorded acoustic with all of them with really good, well, you know, most of them very good results, unless it was a mic that just isn't really, you know, the best for that particular situation. But nowadays, you know, we have so many options. I did a video earlier in the week with this Godin Fairmount, and I was showing how the folks at Godin were really brilliant in including the LR Baggs Anthem system, which is an under-saddle piezo style pickup combined with an under-the-bridge microphone system, which has been EQ'd to sound much more natural, and we can blend the two. I've had great success recording with this, not just on this guitar, but on guitars in the past. So I'm going to use that as one example, both the piezo pickup by itself and also the Anthem microphone by itself. I'm also going to show you the sound of the piezo pickup recorded directly through a 3 Sigma acoustic impulse response. I'll have the link to those below. The 3 Sigma folks have done a very nice job in giving us impulse responses that we could, you know, slap into our signal chain and record or play live through to get a much more natural acoustic tone than the normal kind of piezo pickup sound. And it was quite nice. So I'll put a link to those guys, and my hat's off to the 3 Sigma folks. Very, very nice work on those. And I'm also going to record through 2 different types of microphones here in the studio. I have a Sterling Audio ST151 large diaphragm condenser, and I also have a Sterling Audio ST170 ribbon mic. And I did both to let you hear how big a difference even using different types of microphones can have on our finished product. I didn't have any small diaphragm condensers here in the studio. So, but I think we have enough in here to listen to get the point across. So there's also other things out there now. The Fishman folks have the Aura imaging system, a DI box. I can't remember the exact name of it, but an amazing DI box I've used before, and it kind of works off the same sort of thing. We plug our piezo equipped acoustic in there, and it gives us all these different models and images that sound like mic'd acoustic guitars in the studio. A small version of that was built into an old Godin steel string multi-ack ambience guitar that I had. That was amazing, that guitar. And I did many recordings with that, not needing to set up the microphone. You know, the problem with the microphone is we have to be more concerned about ambient noise, things bleeding onto our mics, you know. If we have noise in our house, it's going to end up on our recording. You know, it's a little bit tricky sometimes with microphones, but these new, you know, IRs and imaging systems that allow us to kind of record with the sound of a mic'd acoustic in the studio without any of those issues. Pretty interesting stuff and some amazing results. So let's do this. Let's dive over to HX Edit and take a look and see how I set this all up. All right, so here we are back over at HX Edit. And if you notice the preset that I have set up, I have 3 separate paths. I'll show you in a second how to recreate this. But first of all, let me show you what I did. I took a direct signal out of the guitar, which in this case, like I said, was the Godin Fairmount guitar with the onboard LR Baggs Anthem system. The Anthem system is a combination of the LR Baggs undersaddle element pickup in combination with their Anthem Tru Mic technology. Gives us a way to blend the two or have all of one or all of the other. So on the recordings, what I did, I had to do 2 separate recordings here to capture all of this. But the first set of recordings is going to be the undersaddle element pickup, recorded again on path 2, fed through the 3 Sigma Martin 45E Piezo 2A impulse response that I purchased off of the fine folks at 3 Sigma. The link will be below for their products. And then I also set up a third path with a microphone signal, okay, going into a bit of compression and a dab of EQ, okay, and I'll show you how I set this all up in just a second. So what that gave me was the ability to record the DI'd signal of the piezo pickup, the DI'd signal of the piezo pickup recorded through the impulse response from 3 Sigma, the microphone with some processing, and then I set up internally, didn't require a path, I used USB 8 output on the Helix audio interface, which if anybody has watched my previous videos about Helix in the Studio, they know that that is going to be the dry, unaffected microphone preamp signal going down to our recording, okay? So this has processing, the other doesn't. We're not going to see it here, but we will see it in Cubase when I get this set up. So let's do this. Let's go over to a new preset and I'll show you from scratch how I set this up. First, what I did is I put a gain block here on our path 1A and I dragged that down to path 1B. I grabbed my split block and my merge block and I dragged both of those down. I added another gain block here on path 1A. Now, as I said, this is going to be our direct signal, right? Just our direct signal of our piezo. So I want to set this to guitar input only. I want to set this to guitar input only because I also want the same signal feeding this. Only difference is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put an impulse response on that. And I'm going to check where I put that on my impulses, and it's in impulse number 34. So I'm going to select number 34 right here, and I'm going to record to that. Now, what I also did on these two is I turned these gain blocks on, and I just cranked the gain up by 12 dB to get a little more signal going into this. I didn't have to do that. I could have added more signal on the output, but I was getting enough signal. I'm recording in 24 bits in Cubase. It's not super important to have, you know, this hitting the ceiling. I wanted some headroom in case I want to process later. But this is optional. You could go before or after. That's fine. Now on the next path, what I decided to do is I chose the microphone input. I added a LA Studio comp, and I added just a dab of low and high shelf EQ. Now the important point here was to be able to set these to separate outputs. So I set the first output, which is our direct piezo, I set that to USB 1.2. I set our one with the direct piezo with the impulse response to USB 3.4. And I set the microphone to USB 5.6. Now we have to remember that because we're going to assign those in Cubase to particular places, right? And that set me up to also then have USB 8, like I said, to have the dry, unaffected signal of the mic preamp. Okay, so that's basically how I set that up. Now let's go back to the acoustic record or preset that I set up to see what the actual settings were. But before we do that, let's go over to Cubase. You'll see I've already recorded tracks here, but let me show you how I did this. I go up to Audio Studio tab, Audio Connections, or I could just hit F4. Okay, I already had it open, that's why it disappeared. F4 will do it as well. Now, here's what I did. I set up 4 mono buses. So I just hit Add Bus. I want 4 more, and then I added the buses. I already have them added. So mono in 1. I could even come in here if I didn't want to get confused, and I could say, label these piezo DI, and then I set that to input 1, because remember, I set this to USB 1.2 out, so I need that to be feeding into Cubase. So by setting this to 1, that's going to be my piezo, right? I could set this to piezo IR, all right? I can set my third one to mic. Actually, let's do this. Mic FX, because that's where we're adding a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQ. And then I could label this one mic DI, just so there's no confusion. And if you notice, that's on input 8, which is going to be that direct unaffected signal. Okay, I hope that's all right so far. Then I added my different tracks here, and I made sure that they were assigned to, if you notice here, piezo DI input, piezo IR input, mic effects, mic DI. Now down here I did a second take where I swapped out the large diaphragm condenser mic with a ribbon mic. Okay, so again, I went with the mic DI input on this one, and then I had the Anthem mic, which is going to be on the piezo DI, but I rolled it over to just the Anthem mic system like we had discussed. Okay, so that's how I got into this. Now let's look at the settings I had over here. As I mentioned, the piezo DI, didn't want anything, but I boosted the gain up 12 dB. Could have done it at the end here as well. That's really not going to affect anything. Again, I chose the same thing over here to get a little more signal going into the IR. I just adjusted the IR level to minus 12 dB instead of the minus 18 dB that it normally is set at when you throw an IR in there, for the simple reason that I was just trying to get the volume levels the same between them. Now on the mic track, I took a LA Studio comp with a gain of 4 on the compressed setting, mixed at 100%, and peak reduction of 5.5. I was just getting it to kiss the acoustic just a little bit, maybe half a dB to 1 dB of gain reduction, just to control any peaks and add a little tiny bit of glue and color to it. That's it. And on the EQ, I did something I do quite often in the studio. I took a low and high shelf. I took all the frequencies below 550 hertz, brought them back 2 dB, went up to all the frequencies above 3 kilohertz and added 2 dB. Now, I'm just doing this to show that this is one thing we can do in the studio, is we can process with the Helix going into the DAW so that we print it to tape or to the hard drive. But you know, I actually prefer to work the other way where I just use the DI, USB 8. So in that case, I wouldn't have even had to set up a path. I could have just set up USB 8 in Cubase and just recorded without any processing here at all if I was just doing the one microphone. So interesting stuff. Now, one thing to be noted, in the global settings, we do have to go in when using a microphone, and depending on the microphone that you're using, if it requires phantom power, both microphones I use today do, the large diaphragm condenser and the ST ribbon mic from Sterling Audio. It's rare. A lot of ribbon mics don't use phantom power, and in fact, if you plug one in with phantom power, you could ruin it, depending on the model you have. So you got to be careful about that. So we go in, we turn on phantom power, and then we adjust the mic gain on the preamp down there as well. So I had to add some mic gain to get this up to a level that was comparable to the other tracks. And I try to have these fairly balanced, okay? The volume matching is going to be super difficult because of the different transient response of these different recording mediums, right, of whether going DI or mic. So they're close enough, but there's going to be such a dramatic tone difference that you're going to hear anyways. It's not so important to have everything, you know, perfectly within 0.1 dB. So that's the setup, really, and that's what I used to record these tracks, which you can see labeled here, Guitar Piezo DI. So this, again, is the LR Baggs Element guitar pickup, undersaddle guitar pickup on the Godin Fairmount. Guitar Piezo IR is the same track as this, but recorded through this 3 Sigma acoustic impulse response, so we can compare that. The guitar microphone with FX, this is going to be the large diaphragm condenser with the touch of EQ and touch of compression going in. The guitar mic DI is going to be just the straight large diaphragm condenser. The guitar ribbon is going to be a different, the ribbon and the Anthem mic are going to be a slightly different performance because I couldn't capture it all with the same performance, but it'll get the point across. That's going to be the ST170 ribbon mic. And we'll get to hear the difference between the large diaphragm condenser versus the ribbon. You'll hear the difference there quite dramatically. And then the final one is going to be just the LR Baggs Anthem mic alone without the element pickup. Although I believe there's still a tiny bit of element always dialed in just on the low end of the sound. But we'll hear that in a second. I'm going to show you now the videos of the performances so you can hear them back to back. Keep in mind when you're watching the microphone placement, okay? And this is a really important thing about recording acoustic guitars, I think. A lot of folks will slap a microphone right in front of the sound hole, you know, a couple inches back, and they get this really boomy kind of out of control sound that requires a lot of sort of EQ and surgery after the fact to kind of make it usable, if we can even salvage it. What I oftentimes do is I try to point the microphone maybe, you know, 3 inches, 4 inches back, depending on what I'm going for. Kind of the closer you get it, the more bottom end you're going to get. Further back, we're going to get more roominess and less bottom end. But I try to point it sort of between the 12th fret and the body joint, somewhere between the 12th to 14th fret, a few inches back, kind of pointing down at the guitar, so it's not just kind of getting hit straight on. And I found that this is a really good starting point. But having said that too, keep something in mind. I don't think I've ever recorded an acoustic guitar in any environment with any mic, with any guitar, where I didn't have to EQ it in the mix afterwards. Add some compression, add some reverb, do something to liven it up. This is not going to be the type of thing where it's like my Helix presets where it's like no post-processing, here it is, plug your guitar and go. You know, there's so many variables here. What's the acoustic guitar we're playing? What's the microphone? How far did we mic it? Is that what's going to suit the mix? You know, so I almost always process it somehow, and I'll show you a little bit about how we can do that very simply to make our tracks even better. So let's take a look at the short performances that I did, and I'll be back and we'll come back into Cubase. Okay, so that's the differences. I'm sure you heard a huge amount of difference between those different tracks, but let's dive into them a little more. So if we listen again here, and I'm just gonna set this up at the beginning so we can come back to this. Guitar Piezo DI. Okay, a few words about this. I would never record with the piezo pickup in the studio, but that's just me. Unless I was gonna blend it very subtly in to get a little bit of that buzzy kind of cutting quality to it. I just don't find it natural. You know, there's always that sort of upper end buzziness to it. The LR Baggs Element system is probably one of the best out there that I've heard, but it still has those qualities to it, you know? So not a way that I would tend to record in the studio. Now let's compare that. I'm gonna just unmute this and solo back and forth between that DI with the 3 Sigma impulse response. Let's take a listen. Much better, very usable. I'm very impressed with the folks at 3 Sigma for coming up with these impulse responses. Very nice. $10 for a package of impulse responses with a bunch of variations to them. Really, really nice work, and I would recommend anybody go and support them. That's a great deal. If you're recording just piezo pickup in the studio and you want to make it sound more realistic, probably any one of these is going to get you there in a mix that's going to sound very good. So very impressed with that. If I was to be super picky, I still hear a slight bit of that unnatural high end, but very subtle, but really, really nice work. Now let's take a listen to the guitar microphone, the large diaphragm condenser, direct with no processing. And that sounds like this. I think you'll agree that that has the most natural acoustic sound. When that pick hits the strings, we don't hear any of that unnatural kind of buzziness to it, right? Let's compare that to the 3 Sigma IR. So we'll go with the guitar microphone first, the large diaphragm condenser, and we'll back and forth between those. Listen for the high end where the pick is hitting the strings for the difference in the quality of the sound. Take a listen for that. Do you hear what I'm talking about? And that's the type of thing, that's why I've always loved the real acoustic guitar mic'd in the studio sound. Very natural, what we're used to kind of more hearing, right? Much more natural, high end, a little bit fuller in the bottom, but that doesn't take anything away from the impulse response. I mean, those are very usable. And you know, I'll even say that in some cases, that could possibly sound better in a mix. Maybe it's going to cut better, maybe it's going to blend better. We don't know, it depends on the mix we're doing, depends on what it is we're trying to accomplish in the end. So, you know, not to take anything away from the impulse response, but the acoustic mic is kind of where it's at for me. Let's compare that now to the subtle EQ changes that I made and a little bit of compression I added on, okay? Which again was a subtle bit of like maybe a dB to half a dB to a dB of compression with the LA Studio comp and these settings on the high and low shelf, okay? Let's take a listen to that. I'll start with the unaffected large diaphragm condenser and I'll go back and forth between it and the microphone with the EQ and compression. Okay, here first starting without the effects. Do you hear how it has a touch more clarity, a little bit more under control, and some of those low mids are just cleaned up so there isn't the booming boxiness almost to it. Listen again. So here's the mic DI, and then I'll go back and forth. Very subtle changes, not heavy-handed with the EQ or the compression, but just going to give it that more polished sound. And I think that of all of these, that's what's going to sit in the mix the nicest. Let's compare the affected microphone with the EQ and compression to the 3 Sigma impulse response. So here's the microphone first, and I'll go back and forth. I think we'd probably all agree that so far guitar microphone with the bit of effects sounds the most natural and kind of usable right out of the box. So that's great. Now, here's something interesting. I'm going to go back to my large diaphragm condenser mic, and then I'm going to go between that and the ribbon mic. Now, keep in mind, these are different performances, so it's not going to be as seamless a switch, but just concentrate more on the tone. I guess I could have set the ribbon mic up at the same time, but then I wouldn't have been able to get the same close placement. I tried to get the placements as close. And you know, moving a microphone just a couple inches either way is going to change the sound dramatically, and less about the microphone and more about the positioning of it with the guitar, much like a guitar on a microphone and an electric guitar speaker as well. You know, that's another a good point to bring up about recording with acoustic guitar microphones, is if we're playing, we want to get very used to not being moving around up and down. I've done recording engineering with people who were real movers while they played acoustic guitar and the microphone. You get this weirdness in the sound. The tone is changing so much because they're changing the microphone placement by their body movements, you know. So anyway, so here again, large diaphragm condenser, and I'll switch back and forth between it and the ribbon mic, okay? Hear how much darker it is? Muddy, really, you know? I don't know if it's my first choice, a ribbon mic for recording acoustic guitar, but sometimes if we want kind of an older vintage lo-fi sound, it can be beautiful. But the one great thing about ribbon mics, which I've talked about in my electric guitar videos, is that they take EQ so well. So watch this. I'm gonna come back over here. We'll play the, in fact, I'll just get this looped here so that I don't have to worry about that. I'm going to pull up the channel settings here and just use the onboard EQ to kind of mess around with the settings and see if we can make that a little more brilliant sounding, all right? Here we go. Okay, so with a few EQ changes, what I did is I went to a high shelf, boosted 5.8 dB on all the frequencies above 3,974 EQ with a Q of 1. With a Q of 0.2 at 453 hertz, I took out 3.4 dB, and then I did a low cut on that at 87 hertz with a 24 dB per octave setting. I'm going to turn that off, listen to the ribbon mic with it off, and then when I click the little yellow button and it goes off, then that's going to be with the EQ engaged. So here it is with it off. Watch when I switch. All of a sudden we have a beautiful, usable track. Really nice stuff, you know. So let's leave those settings on and now compare that to the large diaphragm condenser, okay? So here, first is the large diaphragm condenser, and I'll go to the ribbon mic with the EQ settings. Much better, isn't it? You know, they're different still, but both are extremely usable. There's things I really like about that ribbon mic now that I've added some EQ to it. And another good thing to keep in mind, we could do a similar thing over on the guitar mic DI in rolling out, doing a low cut on it so that we get rid of any sort of unwanted boominess on the bottom. You know, subtle, but it helps clean up the bottom end in the mix. Now, you know, something like what I did here on the ribbon mic, adding this EQ in, if you notice what settings I used, you could just as easily go into the Helix, grab one of their EQs, apply similar settings, and record that right in if you know that that's what that mic sounds like, if you have a mic you use all the time. So really neat way to sort of educate ourselves about it. Now, last but not least, we have the mic alone from the Anthem, LR Baggs Anthem system. Now, I find that this is a great option. I love this system, especially for live, but also in the studio. It does need a little bit of EQ though, which is understandable. This is you know, an under saddle microphone with EQ that they've sort of tried to get it to sound as natural as possible. Let's listen to that. If we compare that to, let's say, the actual guitar mic, obviously kind of muddy. I could probably go in and add a lot of the same changes that I just made on the other microphones and really have this come to life a lot more, I'm thinking. Let's see here. Let's do something like this. So it does improve it a lot and totally usable. And if I played with that a little bit more, depending on the situation I'm in, it's going to really be a usable situation. So all the options we have, right? It's pretty crazy how many different ways we have of recording acoustic guitar. Like I said, to sum up my take on it, I would never record with just a piezo pickup. That's a live thing as far as I'm concerned, unless I was doing something, I was going for a very particular effect or to blend it with something else subtly. But normally that wouldn't be my main acoustic guitar tone. This is my first time trying this 3 Sigma IRs. Very impressed with those, very usable, and I could see myself using those in a mix quite easily with very little work. I think my first choice is always going to be either a small diaphragm condenser or large diaphragm condenser, depending on the sound I want, with some little EQ moves as I showed you today. Very subtle. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed, and those are going to fit in the mix, you know. But I think now that shows the difference between a real mic'd acoustic and any of these other options. The real mic'd acoustic is always, in my opinion, going to edge it out, although the other options are very good. It's nice to hear the difference between the different microphones. Nice to know that, you know, if I grab that ribbon mic, kind of in advance what it's going to bring to the table versus any of the other types of microphones. It's just all about being educated about these things, right? And then the Anthem system, totally usable. I've recorded with it before, as I showed in the video, and I think I even gave an example off of one of my albums where I did use it to record as well. Really interesting stuff. I hope that helps you guys to sort of know how to use the Helix a little bit better when recording with acoustic guitar. And I think some folks may have thought I would have been much heavier handed on my processing, right? And it really depends on how we get our sound into the computer. That's going to determine how we want to go about shaping it with EQ and compression. I didn't add a lot of compression here. Like I said, usually if I am going to add it, it's going to be very subtle. I don't want to squash it. I've heard recordings with, you know, that threshold pulled really low and a super high ratio. I'm thinking, you know, ratio of 2 to 1, 3 to 1, get that threshold down so that you're just kissing the peaks, right? So maybe you're getting half a dB to a dB of compression. Again, this is just my opinion, right? Attack of maybe 5 milliseconds, release of 50 to 100 milliseconds. Then we could even use some parallel compression, you know, pull it back to 75% mix to get some of the direct signal going through. But just some of the settings that I would use. And again, it really depends on the situation you're in. You know, certain recordings call for certain things and others call for other things. But those are sort of my starting points. So I hope you guys found that helpful and enjoyable. Please check out my friends at Godin. I'm telling you guys, I am blown away with this Godin Fairmount acoustic. I've had a hard time not playing it recently. I love the tone, plays beautifully, looks gorgeous. So give them a good look at those guitars. Again, I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not endorsed by them or anything. They were just kind enough to send that over for me to try out. Beautiful, beautiful guitars and beautiful people over there. So check them out. I hope that was helpful. Thank you guys so much for the support. Please like the video, share it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back soon with some more content. Ciao for now.